everyone. We have a guest today. My colleague Vanessa Patrick is here. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, how are you, Ryan?
Vanessa is a very prolific researcher in the consumer behavior marketing research side. She's done a bunch of work on aesthetics and how it intersects with branding and how it intersects with package design and all kinds of very interesting things. She's
Right,
also
excellent.
dabbled a little bit in research that kind of butts up. I hope I don't offend you in saying this, Vanessa. That kind of butts up against what might be considered kind of almost self-help or kind of self-definitional, which is distinctly non-scientific, a lot of it. And she's like actually taking a scientific approach in what she does and helping people kind of define, I don't know, who they are and how they can live better lives. And when she told me that she's written a book recently, I invited her onto the podcast to tell us about it. So she's going to tell us about her new book, which is called The Power of Saying No. Welcome,
Great.
Vanessa.
Thank you.
Yes, very welcome, Vanessa. It's good to have you on the show. And it's when Ryan said that you'd written this book, I thought it was a really interesting topic. So looking forward to having a chat with you.
Start there. Why no, Vanessa? What motivated you to write a book about saying no?
So, as you said, a lot of my research deals with the area of self-regulation or self-control. But you're right in the sense that it takes a kind of more self-helpy angle, because unlike the research on self-control, which is all about deprivation and all about restraint, my research is really about embracing the pleasure of consumption, but putting boundaries or kind of constraints that are self-definitional, that actually help you make decisions that align with your identity and therefore are much more pleasurable and give you much more happiness. So I call this kind of way of thinking about it compassionate self-control. So it is self-control that is much more driven by your own needs and by looking inwards instead of looking outwards for cues as to how to behave.
So not like the boot camp approach to self-control, but more of almost a therapeutic.
And I've written several
approach.
papers that look at self-control in a much more positive light, more as self-discipline, much more as reflection of the values that you have, as opposed to these hard and fast kind of constraints. And one of the things I like to talk about in the book is this notion about personal policies, which are rules that we set up for ourselves that help guide our decisions. A lot of people think about putting up rules as boundaries, as these barbed wires that protect you. Whereas I think about personal policies more as these red velvet ropes that you can decorate your life with, that are soft and pretty, and you set them up to shape your decisions and your choices the way you want them to.
The red velvet ropes are generally to keep out riffraff. So I also like that approach.
So Vanessa, so when I heard when Ryan talked to us about this, it immediately made me think of in the business world of where people don't say no enough, particularly to their boss.
Absolutely.
So again, I'm the balance that Ryan and I always attempt to portray is me coming from the practical world of going, well, okay, so in this case, how do I deal with my boss? How do I turn around and say no to my boss? And Ryan coming at this from the sort of that more sort of academic side. But can you sort of put it into that context
Absolutely.
a bit for me?
In fact, I think that is a key context, because while I did all this work on empowered refusal, I translated it to practice by teaching executives over the last few years about practical ways to deal with this issue. So research essentially shows that yes, we have a huge problem saying no. Women have a significantly higher problem saying no than men do. Women are much more likely to say yes to things that come their way that are not aligned with what they want. And it is essentially a problem, because when you say yes to something that is not aligned to the work, your core work, or the things that actually are that you care to do, you land up not having the time to do the things that are important to you. So there is that trade-off that people struggle with on a regular basis. Now,
Right.
with my work, I essentially come up with this set of 3 competencies that help you navigate this trade-off. I call them the ART of empowered refusal. So let me back up and just define the concept of empowered refusal. So, empowered
Sure.
refusal is the super skill of saying no in a way that is persuasive and does not invite pushback from others. And the
Right.
3 competencies that I identify, the ART, are awareness, rules, not decisions, and totality of self. And when you master these 3 sets of competencies, you become better at the super skill of saying no, whether it is to your boss or to your mother in law, who happen to be the 2 most difficult people to say no to, apparently. Uh,
Right.
and to the host of people who are acquaintances, that we tend to struggle with saying no because we care about our reputation, what people think of us, and our relationships with others. We want friends, and we want them to like us, and we think by saying yes we maintain a reputation and secure those relationships. But in
Right.
fact, that may not always be the case, and you drop the
Oh, that was
ball
going to be my question. Are people right
backfire.
about that?
Say that again.
So I said that was going to be my question. Are people right about that in thinking that you need to say yes to maintain those relationships and your
Absolutely not. In
reputation?
fact,
Inter-
I've run studies which show that you very often say yes when you want to say no, and that only leads you to feel resentful of the other person, and also may even be likely to have you drop the ball on important things and lead you to have a drop in reputation as opposed to enhance your reputation. More importantly, the data also shows that we think we are going to feel really guilty saying no, but in fact we don't feel that guilty saying no once we've actually said no, but we do feel much more negative emotions saying yes when we wanted to say no.
So,
Interesting.
what about in the? I'm thinking. I was chatting to Lorraine, my wife, actually before the show, and I recall a instance where I had one of the team, and one of the problems that this particular team member had was, in my view, she didn't say no enough. Okay, and the problem it was then causing was that nothing was getting done
Yes.
because everybody was asking her to do things. And I kept saying to her, look, you've got to just say no a lot more
Yes.
because,
Yes.
by saying yes to everybody, you think you're trying to do the right thing, but nothing's getting done. So what about in that sort of instance then? How did because again, I'm sure our listeners will be listening to this and going, yeah, my boss keeps asking me to do 50 million things, and I can't do everything. So how do I go about saying no to my boss without without my boss turning around and going, actually, this, they're just lazy, or they don't understand the importance of all these things, or something like that.
Right. So there are definitely strategies associated with dealing with your boss. But I
Right.
think the first mindset that we need to adopt is that when you say yes, when you want to say no, or when your plate is full, you are
Yeah.
you are being a pushover and not a professional.
Right.
It's really important to adopt a professional mindset and have a realistic view about what is possible to get done.
Yeah.
Now, sorry, my microphone
That's all
fell.
right. No worries.
So what the way to look at this is to really look inwards and to determine what is possible, what draws on your strengths, and to have that communication with your boss. In the economy that we live in right now, we are knowledge workers. We are expected to bring our best selves to work. And by taking on too much, the garbage just piles up, and you land up not being able to see what you need to really get done and land up doing all these different things. In fact, research
Right.
shows that we women are more likely to take on non-promotable work, which is all the stuff that has nothing to do with their job. Bringing coffee to the meetings, picking up the donuts, organizing the retirement parties, cleaning up the refrigerator in the break room. Now, these are things that women naturally take on. They have no intrinsic reward. And so the solution is not to take those on, but to figure out ways to kind of make everyone take a turn to do these things. In
Sure.
fact, research shows that women are not only more likely to be asked to take on what these non-promotable tasks, but are also more likely to say yes to the non-promotable tasks. So one of the things I do in the book is identify kind of a way in which you can categorize the asks. So I think the first thing you need to do is to develop that self awareness, to know where your purpose lies, where the opportunity costs are, what are the trade offs you're willing to make. And then every time an ask, a request, a favor comes your way, you kind of use a particular lens in which you evaluate the benefits and the costs. So I call these different asks, like a pass the salt ask. Pass the salt ask is an ask where you don't have to invest much energy, but the other
Sure.
person gains immensely. And it's a pass the salt ask. Someone asks for the salt shaker and you just pass it. It's easy. You should say yes to those things. And
Sure.
Ryan might know these kind of things are things like recommendation letters that you write for students. For them, it's a matter of getting a job or not. Or getting into a university, into an MBA program or not. It's a huge deal for them. It's a much smaller deal for me to do. So it's a yes for those kind of asks. But there are other asks where the benefit to the other person is unclear and the cost to you is super high. It makes I call them bake your famous lasagna asks, which is like these huge, complicated things that you would have to invest a ton of energy in, and it makes no difference because it's just one more dish on the table. I think learning to be able to sift and categorize the asks as they come in and to have those very strong responses, this is a hell yes and this is a hell no, is super important to be able to prioritize how you approach things and how you account for your time.
Yeah, that's great. Can we circle back to you mentioned very briefly your ART framework?
Yes,
Can you real briefly just kind of go through each of those in turn?
absolutely.
So the first one was
The first
awareness.
ART of Empowered Refusal, which is the first one, is awareness. So the ability to look inwards, identify your priorities, your preferences, your beliefs, and what you care about, so that you can use that lens to be able to sift through the different asks. R is rules, not decisions. So I come up with this concept of personal policies, like I mentioned earlier. And personal policies are these simple rules that we make that are based on our values and priorities, and that reflect those values and priorities and how we operate. And so when we have these rules in place, we have an infrastructure that allows us a platform by which you can say no. If you say, I have a policy not to do this, or have a rule not to do that, people respond to that and respect that, because people do respect when you speak from your identity and you don't get pushback. And we've actually published research on that in IJRM, which is the International Journal of Research and Marketing. And the final one is totality of self. So I talk a lot about the importance of using powerful language or standing upwards, words that come from a place of empowerment. But if your standing up words are accompanied by very weak body language, then you can leak power, and you essentially do not have the power by which to support the words. And so, totality of self is bringing your whole self, your body language, the way you speak, your all the nonverbal cues to come across as confident. And that is something that stems a lot from your, when you have those personal policies in place. When you speak from your identity, you are more likely to come across as somebody who's confident and knows what they want.
I like that. I
So,
think from my perspective, that advice spans the internal focus. So you need
Mhm.
to be aware of what you want, and then I think rules could go both ways. So
Absolutely.
by having a rule in place, I don't need to think about it each time because I've already
Absolutely.
essentially made the decision. But also, it communicates to other people. Now, it communicates to the asker that I have this policy or this rule. And then finally, the totality seems to be a lot about communication. I assume that could also reflect back on the self, but a lot of it's about communicating it very clearly. And
And
so
so the
it's
personal
about both
policy,
you and them if you want to make this work out
absolutely.
appropriately.
So the personal policies, I actually develop a framework that I call the dream framework to establish personal policies. And the essentially the personal policies can take two forms. They can be in the form of self-talk, so rules that
Mhm.
you set up for yourself. So for example, morning rituals, what do you do when you get up? This is stuff that you have to manage and you have to deal with. But then you can also have announcements. Announcements are the personal policies that you share with others, so they know what your preferences are and where you prefer to, how you prefer to operate. And so I've spoken to many, many successful leaders in organizations, and a lot of them do set up these personal policies, not only for themselves, but they also communicate them to others. So, for example, there's a banker who's in charge of this huge multi-million-dollar organization, and for her, she sets 8 to 9 in the morning to kind of just get a good sense of the business and the decisions she has to make. And that's a personal decision. So she needs the self discipline to be able to get to her desk and carve that time out to do this important work. But she also has to communicate to other people not to set up meetings at that time. Those are her rules. And I think when we set up these rules, they almost liberate us to be able to live the life according to on our own terms, which is very much a very, very central aspect of my book.
so what about when you're then dealing with customers? So I'm thinking of, I can think of, when we used to be in the business to business world, and or when I was dealing in the business to business world for a bit large corporate, and a customer would be asking you
Mm-hmm.
something, okay, and it. I guess that's that feels a little different. How do you communicate those things then to from
That's
a
a great
customer
question,
perspective?
actually. And I address that in the book in this way. I essentially say that there are parameters to your job. And if you are in that job, you have implicitly agreed to those parameters. If you have agreed, for example, to deal with customer calls 24/7, that is
Yeah,
something you have established as a parameter of your job.
sure.
If you did not want to do that, then maybe this is not the right job for you. But if those are not the parameters of your job, if they are not part of the job description and you still engage in them, then you need to kind of pull back a little bit and reflect as to whether there are alternative options. So many people in my classes, for example, have talked about the fact that they have carved out time, say between 6 and 8 is dinner time. It's time for
Yeah,
family. And so I don't
sure,
take work calls during that time. And as soon as
sure,
you establish those personal policies, tell yourself that I don't take calls between 6 and 8, and everyone on your team knows you don't take calls between 6 and 8, they will not call you. You will not receive calls between 6 and 8 because you've established those preferences and you've communicated them to others.
sure. And I guess at the end of the day, depending upon the customer and stuff like that, there's no reason why you couldn't tell your customer that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
that
let me
makes
go back
sense.
to kind of where we started, which was self-regulation. And
Mm-hmm.
this might be a little esoteric of a question, but from a self-regulation standpoint, from a self control standpoint, do you think it's more important to learn how to say no to yourself or to other people? Or is it both?
That's a really great question.
Was it
I
better than
let
Colin's last question?
let me
Because I'm
tell
keeping track.
The answer is no.
Oh, very well played, Colin. Very well played.
the first paper I published on empowered refusal is really about self-talk. And the idea came from looking at consumers struggling with managing their own self-regulation in the context of food. So essentially, like let's say you're at a Weight Watchers meeting, a large bit of the conversation is about the struggle with how to say no to the food that's in front of you. How do I go for a party and not eat? How do I get myself to move from my desk and actually go to the gym or go for a walk? And given my interest in self regulation, I would say you need to manage yourself first before you should manage others. So, my starting point is always deal with yourself first. If you can develop a mastery of yourself and you can use self talk, set up personal policies, then it naturally spills over to other people. It's really impossible to create all these announcements for other people, but then be completely loose with yourself in terms of self-discipline. So I would say, to answer your question, start with yourself first. If you can master that, much more easy to deal with others.
Great answer.
And is there something then about the way that you do that? So
Yes.
let me explain where I'm coming from. So one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years is, and when you talk about weight loss, okay, because I've lost a lot of weight recently, and one of the things that I was being taught about was the emotions attached to that, okay, to the act of doing whatever you're doing, okay, in my case, eating, and the way that you then talk to yourself. So, in other words, actually try not to say no, because it feels like you're in a constant fight with yourself. Does that make sense? Now, I don't know
Absolutely.
if this is, I guess I'm sort of looking to you from a more scientific perspective, but it was
Yes.
like saying, well, don't say no, Colin, you can't have that. Say, and this is one of the things I particularly like, is actually say, I could have that tomorrow.
Right.
So it's not saying, it's a subtle difference, but it's not saying, no, don't eat that, Colin, slap over the wrist, you silly boy, why would you thinking of that? It was, you could have that, but maybe you should have it a bit later on as opposed to having it now. What's your
I'm
thought of
super
that?
excited you gave me that example, because I actually published
Right,
a paper with my colleague Nicole Mead.
right,
Ryan, you might know her. She calls strategic we're on the topic of strategic procrastination, which is
right,
essentially this idea of compassionate self-control in the context of, instead of saying no to yourself and depriving yourself and giving yourself a slap on the wrist, tell yourself, sure, you can have it, but tomorrow. And what we show is, by strategically procrastinating your decision, you don't make a decision in the heat of the moment,
in the here and
and
now,
and
yeah,
and you actually, when the time comes, you may not even want that thing, because you reflect back and say,
sure,
well, maybe I didn't want it. And
sure,
so we show that deprivation definitely backfires, because when we tell ourselves we can't do something, we actually feel more like we really, really want it more.
sure,
So it builds up the
sure,
desire for it.
yeah,
If we tell ourselves, no, you can't have it, it hurts. But when we say, sure,
sure,
you can have it, just not right now, you kind of let the desire for it naturally wane. And then
yes,
you're less likely to have it. So instead of giving in the moment, tell yourself, not sure, but not now.
yes.
And so that's
It's
one.
interesting. Sorry, it's interesting because the way it was described to me was, and I can't remember the theory behind this, but you remember was it transactional? It's the adult child. What's it called? I
Yes,
can't
yes,
remember.
I'm okay, you're
It,
okay kind of thing.
yeah, it's sort of like, in other words, the danger is you turn around and go, I can't care less what the rules are.
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to go and eat this bar of chocolate because those are bloody stupid rules. I know they're my rules, but those are bloody stupid rules anyway. And
Yes.
you act up like a typical teenager, basically. even though you're somewhat older than a teenager.
I think the other point you made, which is super important, is the importance and power of language. And so I spend a
Sure.
lot of time in the book talking about how we talk to ourselves. We talk to ourselves more than anyone else talks to us. And the
Yes.
way we talk to ourselves really matters. So I've been really, really interested in this notion of self talk and how we frame our self talk to empower ourselves, to bring out the best in ourselves rather than diminish ourselves. So, for example, the paper on empowered refusal looks at two different phrases. Most people, when they are faced with a temptation, say, "Oh no, I can't eat that chocolate cake," or I can't take a holiday, or I can't leave for vacation. And that signals deprivation to yourself. But if you actually invoke a personal rule and you think about why you don't want to do this, and then you make it a personal policy and reframe that "I can't" to "I don't," it
Sure.
changes the way you come across not only to yourself but also to others. So if you tell someone, "I
Sure.
don't eat chocolate cake," or "I don't take the elevator when I can take the stairs," or "I don't
Sure.
miss out on an opportunity to talk about my book,"
Yes.
uh, it comes across as much more empowered, much more driven by the self.
Yes. Yes. No,
And
I
so
agree
that
with you.
language is super important.
Yes. And actually, thinking about it, what it also does is it changes the way that somebody responds to you as well. In
Absolutely.
my experience, so by saying I can't, because if you say I can't,
You get
then
pushback.
people go, yeah, they go, oh, go on, have a bit, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So it's their birthday or whatever else. But if you say I don't, or you have a rule or policy, it's actually quite interesting. Actually, thinking about it, I'm glad we're having this conversation. Is because it's quite surprising. I get a lot of phone calls at work, Beyond Philosophy, with people saying, we would like you to come and speak at our event, but we want you to pay me to pay to speak at their event. And I go, I'm not doing that. You pay me to come and speak at your event, not me the other way around. And what I've
Yes.
learned over the years is to say, we have a policy that says that we shouldn't do that. And as soon as you say we have a policy, they don't argue with you anymore. And
Absolutely.
it's
It's
strange.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that really works, because essentially you're communicating a rule that you've established and people don't push
Yes.
back against those rules.
I'm
It's
just surprised how people don't push back, to be totally
no,
honest.
and you raise the issue of money, and money is often a very big deal. In fact, I ran a study where we talked about how do you say no to someone who's asking you for a loan. And
Sure.
essentially, most people, their natural tendency is to come up with an excuse. So let's say
Sure.
everyone wants to say no, but some people, we gave them an excuse. So we said them, well, well, I am saving up for going to college. I mean, there are a whole bunch of excuses as to why you can't give people money. Versus develop a personal policy. I have a rule about not giving money, not loaning money for whatever
Sure.
reason. What
Yes.
I found in the data is that both work effectively in the short run in shooing the other person away. The difference, however, is 5 years later, when that person thinks about asking you for money, no longer that excuse matters. So the excuse has gone
Right.
away. So they will come back and
Right.
ask you. But a personal
Right.
policy has legs.
Right.
A personal
Yeah.
policy essentially is
Yeah.
like, this is my stance on the matter.
Yeah.
Now,
I've,
5 years
I've,
later or 20 years later, this is how I feel about money. End of
I've
story.
got, I've got to tell you, it's worked with Ryan and me. I mean, every time he asks me for money, I say no, mate.
I tell him I have a personal policy of asking for money every time we talk. So, you know,
Intractable problem.
that's right. Rock and a hard place. I mean, that's so interesting. I had never thought of it in those terms until you put it that way. But it essentially changes the locus of control, which is
Mhm.
a psychology idea about kind of whether you are a victim of the universe or whether you have a say in what's happening to you. And so if you say I can't, that's an
Yes.
external force, right? Like,
Yes.
oh, I also wish that I could do this thing, but there's some external force. And that's why you get people who will then try to align with you. Like, oh yeah, of course you can. Like we're on the same side here, pushing back against
Exactly.
this external constraint. As opposed to if you say, I won't. I have this personal policy. Now you are the one who's created that barrier. It is your choice. And now if
Yes.
somebody wants to get around that, they need to push against you directly. And
Right.
I think that
So,
that then is uncomfortable for them. I think that's an amazing insight. It's a really cool way of phrasing that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
very
think,
much
and
so.
it really works for people. I mean, I think that people, when you wrap your head around it and just start becoming much more mindful in the way you approach things. So my number one rule is never say yes right away to anything. And you should always think about whether this is something to say worth saying yes to, what are the trade-offs, and how you can phrase your refusal in a way that is empowered. So we need to
Sure,
learn to practice that, and even me who's written the book needs to pause and think about what's the best way to deal with it, as opposed to just that gut response. There's research that
sure.
shows that regardless of there's a linguist who's actually in Australia, I believe. He's done some research that looks at the speed with which people respond to yeses and nos. It turns out that we are so quick to say yes, regardless of culture. We are so
Right,
socialized to just be so cooperative and want to just agree that the speed with which we respond with a yes is faster than the speed with which we respond to the no. And
well,
so we need to learn to kind of just hold ourselves back, train ourselves not to kind of jump to that default response, but really reflect as to whether this is a good choice for us.
sure. So the people listening to this, I'm sure, will be enjoying it as much as Ryan and I. But what would be the practical things then? So we've talked a lot about sort of theory, but if people are going, okay, I'm going to take this away, I'm going to do something with this
Yes.
today. What is your recommendation of what they do?
There are several things to do. One is, let's say that you want to choose the domain in which you want to begin. So let's say you are struggling with self-regulation. So then you want to
Yeah,
think about, like, how do I start saying no to myself? Or maybe you want to start saying no to other people. So start with the domain. Where do you want the most change? And
right,
then start reflecting about why you want that change, and what are the values that you want to see come up in your life. What are things that you want to see that you are not seeing right now? And
sure,
then develop personal policies around them, develop the self-awareness. I also bring up a really interesting concept which I think is really interesting, which is how to say no to people who won't say no, who won't take no for an answer. And so
right.
you can practice empowered refusal, but there are some people who just will not take no for an answer.
Can
I
you just
call
bear with me, Lorraine? Can you come in and listen to this, please?
That's hilarious. I call these people, Lorraine, walnut trees. Walnut trees are essentially these beautiful, luxuriant trees. But what they do is that they exude a herbicide called juglone into the soil, and they pretty much destroy all other plants around it. So they have this luxurious canopy, but every other plant is decimated. And so I use, instead of calling these people, assholes or terrible people, I essentially call them walnut trees, which is, much more nicer way of saying them.
Yes,
So I point out walnut tree, walnut tree, walnut tree. But the thing about walnut trees is and the thing about saying no is to identify, like, what are the situations in which you find yourself in traps. So throughout the book, I identify these traps. But with the
right,
walnut tree, there are specific strategies that walnut trees use. So, for example, walnut trees will always seek a home court advantage. They will always put you in a corner, but in a way where they have some certain power over you. They might call you to their office, they might invite you to lunch where they are paying. So, they have like this power dynamic that they've established. The second thing
right.
is they will always ask you face to face, because we are 34% more 34 times more likely, 34 times, not percentage, times more likely to say yes to a face-to-face request than not. So if you are, vulnerable to the shade of a walnut tree, you need to avoid the face-to-face.
Right.
So
Right.
these are the
Yeah.
kind of things that we need to learn. The other thing
Yeah.
walnut trees will do is they push you to make a choice now, and you need to push back and take your time to make that choice, preferably in a
Sure.
separate location later. So these are the kind of
Sure.
strategies. I think
Yeah.
what I want to
Very
do
good.
with the book is create these really realistic scenarios and very,
Yeah.
very concrete things that you can do, that you
Yeah.
develop these competencies and then are able to navigate these difficult situations.
No, that's great. And for the listener, again, what's the we're obviously going to put a link in the show notes for the book, but perhaps you could tell us the title again.
Yes, it's called The Power of Saying No, the new
Okay.
science of how to say no to take charge of your life.
Great. And we'll put a link in the show notes. And
Thank
if
you.
people want to get hold of you, then how do they do that, Vanessa?
Email and LinkedIn.
Okay. Cool. Great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, again, we'll put a link in the show notes going forward.
All
Ryan,
right.
was there any other last question you wanted to ask, or are we?
No, just an observation. I mean, until I had read the book and had this discussion, you don't appreciate kind of the difficulty of saying no. There's just so much cultural and maybe even subcultural, like just biological, maybe. There's so many pushes towards saying yes that the necessity of kind of developing strategies and tactics for being able to effectively say no while maintaining relationships and all the other things is not something that I would have necessarily considered or thought there was a need for. I'm convinced that there is. Like, I think this is just a really valuable skill to have at any level of your career. And so, yeah, I'm
I
recommending the
appreciate
book.
that.
No, it's great. And if you don't mind, I will be citing you in my divorce with Lorraine. So
I never thought
I'll
of
be
that as an outcome of writing the
citing
book.
this podcast. It happened because of this podcast. So there's advantages and disadvantages both ways, I suppose. So anyway, thanks very much for coming on the show. Much appreciated. And we hope people will say yes to listening to the podcast next week.
I hope so
Cheers.
too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.